Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm in conversation with acclaimed novelist Kristin Bair. Kristin is the author of Agatha Arch is Afraid of Everything. It's the story of a quirky yet lovable mother who is forced to reevaluate her life and confront her fears after she discovers her husband in a compromising position with the neighborhood dog walker. Out comes the hatchet, down goes the shed, and heartbreak, hilarity, and hope ensue. As Kristin Bair O'Keefe, she has also authored the novels Thirsty and The Art of Floating. Additionally, her work has appeared in numerous publications including Flying, Journal of Writing and Environment, the Christian Science Monitor, Poets and Writers Magazine, and Writer's Digest. Kristin holds an MFA from Columbia College Chicago and a BA in English and Journalism from Indiana University Bloomington. She is a popular speaker and writing instructor whose travels have landed her engagements all around the globe. A native of Pittsburgh, she now makes her home outside of Boston with her husband and their 2 children. Agatha Arch is Afraid of Everything was a 5-year labor of love, and early response leaves no doubt that it was time well spent. Publishers Weekly awarded the book a starred review noting, "Charming, a paradoxically intrepid and terrified individual, Agatha will draw readers in with her wry takes. Fans of Where'd You Go, Bernadette and Eleanor Oliphant is Fine will love this clever romp." All of this I can tell you is true. As I was turning the pages and laughing out loud, much to the detriment of my wife and her sleeping schedule, I kept thinking, this is the book I need in my life right now, and I hope you'll feel the same. Without further ado, it's my great honor to present this quirky little cyber chat with Kristin Bair. Hi everybody, welcome to episode 36 of Central Booking. I am in the company of Kristin Bair today, who is the author of the brand new Agatha Arch is Afraid of Everything. And you can see it right behind Kristin because she has the best backdrop ever. Even the binoculars. I love it. So welcome to the show, Kristin. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it is wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And you've probably already seen me say this all over social media, so you can tune me out for, the next 30 seconds or so. But I just want to tell people that this book is so wonderful. I find that it's a little bit heartbreaking, a lot of bit hilarious, and overall very, very hopeful. And I found myself, saying over and over, this is the book you need in your life right now. And I found that that applies to me, so I'm assuming it's going to apply to a lot of other people as well. So I just wanted to say that right off the bat because it was such a terrific read, and I'm planning on gifting it to everybody, for the holidays. So anyway, I figured we can start at the beginning. That seems an appropriate place to start. But I wanted you to tell us about the day that Agatha's seemingly idyllic life sort of falls to pieces, and then she smashes it to pieces with a hatchet. But also why sort of the absurdity of that moment is really, really important in creating a bonding moment between the readers and Agatha and all of her quirkiness, because she's very quirky, but it works.
Yeah, it's funny because as she was kind of coming to life in my head and on the page, I realized who she was, but I had to connect her deeply from her heart to the reader, because otherwise she would just come off as this nut job who wouldn't be able to carry the story through. So I knew they had to really feel for her as much as they were like, oh my God, who is this woman? So that's where I started, was really taking that really, in that opening couple pages, a really close look at her and being almost inside her internal perception, so close to her.
Right. And for people who don't know, and this isn't a spoiler because it really is the first couple pages of the book, but poor Agatha is at home with her children and they're watching SpongeBob, and she's preparing lunch, and she walks outside and she has the misfortune of discovering her husband in a very compromising position with the neighborhood dog walker, and obviously things get worse from there, and she basically takes a hatchet and she tears down the shed around them as they run for their lives.
They run naked through the neighborhood.
That's right, and there is imagery. I mean,
yeah.
Yep.
This
the movie.
Carry it with you.
You can't not see it. Once it's been read, it will never be unread.
That's right.
But to come back to Agatha, I wanted to ask you as well. Obviously she has a very strong sense of outrage and indignation, and it's understandable. But somehow she always manages to seem to do right by her children. So can you talk a little bit about how motherhood motivates her actions, and also the ways in which her parental perspective offers her sort of a broader perspective of the situation that she's living in?
Yeah, this was another one of those areas where I had to be really careful, because if she really crossed the line, her kids would be at risk, her custody, her own family, even she with the two boys. So even though sometimes she comes really close to crossing the line, she always steps back. She's like, I can't risk that. And I think that is one of the things, hopefully, that people really connect to, moms and dads, is that feeling of like, no matter what, I will never risk that.
Sure, sure. And one of the nice things too, I think, about the book is, the other woman whose name is Willow Bean, but she's also referred to as G Dog, the Grand Dame of Grapefruits, which is in reference to her assets. All the walking that she does helps to develop a certain set of assets. But she could very easily be the bad guy in this book, and somewhat because of the children, she's not. There is that sort of gray area between black and white, and I thought that was really a wonderful way to present things. But I guess we can talk a little bit about fear now. I was going to say, as the title suggests, but it more than suggests,
Yes.
Agatha really is afraid of everything. So can you talk about what her relationship is with fear, and how that sort of changes as she's forced to confront life as a single woman, as a single parent?
Yeah, I mean, to the point where that opening chapter occurs, she has been increasingly afraid of everything throughout her life. And her husband, Dax, has served as that buffer for her. Whenever, a big fear comes in, he kind of steps in and, plays the gallant knight and shields her just enough to keep her steady. And while that's served her well, it hasn't allowed her to really become the human that she could be on her own. So being forced to do that, to stand on her own, gives her the opportunity to face those fears. And she doesn't do it gracefully, to put it mildly. It's not a smooth transition, but it's a fun transition.
Oh, it is. And I have to tell people, like, she sort of becomes basically a spy, and she's got spy pants with 5 million pockets, headlamps, and
fishing line, and
oh yeah, she is prepared for anything, and it's hysterical. And she knows too that she's going to need about 30 pairs of pants, so she just keeps buying them.
Yeah, she buys them. She buys them in different sizes, like many women do. She has her Leatherman Super Tool 300 EOD that she keeps with.
That's right. Those little hammers that you can knock your windows out with, which my mom gave me once for Christmas, so I could relate. And I wanted to ask too, so there's a really great dynamic between Agatha and her therapist, who she refers to as Shrinky Dink, which again, how can you not laugh? And it sort of ranges from familiarity to feistiness with each other. And overall, there's actually really, a seemingly genuine fondness between them. So I wanted to know how you went about capturing the nuances of such a relationship, and why it's important to Agatha to have sort of that sounding board as she's venturing into these uncharted territories.
Yeah, I knew when I figured out what happened between she and Dax, I knew that she needed a safe place and somebody who would kind of rein her in, as the slightest bit when she was about to go over the edge. And so Shrinky Dink came to be. And I loved writing those scenes with Shrinky Dink. I love the rapport between them. I love the play. I love Shrinky Dink's personality against Agatha's. And it was just one of the best things, but it really gave her a safe place to grow, and that was one of the things, that and Bear Grylls, and her bobblehead.
You got to have the bobblehead. Yeah, and I loved those scenes so much. And it's funny because I feel like a lot of times, when I'm reading fiction and there's scenes with the therapist, I'm like, oh, can we just, skip ahead 5 pages or whatever it is? And in this case, every time I saw Shrinky Dink, I said, oh, yes.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, it was just such a great relationship. And Shrinky Dink in her mind is thinking, go Agatha, like,
I know.
you probably shouldn't do this, but hey.
I know.
As long as I tell you not to do it, it doesn't matter what I think.
Exactly.
And I wanted to ask you too about the book's backdrop. I know that you live in or around Boston now, and it is set in a fictional suburb of New England called Wallingford, Massachusetts. And it's funny because for the longest time, it was just Wallingford, Wallingford, Wallingford. And I used to live in Wallingford, Connecticut. So I kept seeing that in my mind. But it's funny because similarly, like they're very insular, settings. So can you talk a little bit about how the insular nature of a small suburban town amplifies the drama and suspense of a book like this?
It is. I mean, there's, some of these New England towns, they have the town center, and that, is the hub, and they have the restaurants, and then the community grows around that. And there's a lot of very white suburbs of Boston. And that plays into this story a little bit. And it amplifies everything that goes on, because everybody, it's like a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And then there's the existence of the Facebook moms group, which, plays another community within that community that really amplifies everything.
Oh man, it does. Yeah, and it's funny because if this happened in a city, nobody would care. Nobody would be paying any attention. You're just sort of another anonymous face in the
Right.
crowd. But what you just said actually transitions beautifully to my next question, because I did want to ask you about the Wallingford Moms Facebook group, because it's funny, any of us who've been on those Facebook groups, even if it's not the moms group, because I'm not on a moms group, but I'm on a Portland town group, and just sometimes to sit back and watch people go at each other about the most benign things, like it's hysterical, it's maddening, you can't turn away.
Like a train wreck.
Yeah, it really,
you're high on.
You're just like watching it, eating your popcorn, chuckling every now and then, thinking this is really absurd, until you get drawn into it and it's you.
Yeah, exactly.
But I did want to ask you about that, because it's funny, Agatha sort of has a very antagonistic relationship with people through that page. So it works as comic relief, but it's also a source of narrative conflict. So can you talk about that juxtaposition, and also what it sort of says about people versus the personas that they or we create online?
Yeah. I put a lot of thought into this because, being in a couple of Facebook mom groups, I get to see all as Agatha says, Facebook mom groups are the glory and suckduckery of modern day parenting. And I think she nails it, because they do this amazing job of supporting and uplifting and building the community. And then they're equally strong at tearing it down and just destruction. And I'm fascinated as a social construct, I'm really actually fascinated by what role that's playing in society today, and what role it's playing in relationships and friendships, and how that all plays out within, in real life kind of thing. And for Agatha, because she's kind of the provocateur, she's the antagonist in the group. She's the person who's, usually poking somebody. And I have this kind of, theory that fear is often camouflaged by anger, and that hopefully along the road, both of those things turn into empathy on both sides of a relationship. And I think Agatha is just classic with that. I think, she is so afraid, and the way that she can manage that has always been anger, and she can throw that better than anybody. the moms group gives her that space because it's, it's not in real life. She has some distance, not that she, couches it in person either, but it really gives her a space to throw it around. But it also gives her a space to start to form friendships and relationships, even when she doesn't think she wants to.
Sure. And I have to ask you too, I've been telling people left, right, and center that, books make great gift giving because the holidays are upon us. And, there is a little bit of holidays in the book, and there's a really great song that Agatha creates, every year. And can you just tease us what that's about? So, people who are looking for a fun little read with a holiday bent, what they might find here.
Yes. And in fact, so the song is the 12 Days of the Wallingford Moms. And Agatha every year writes a new edition of that song that includes 12 of the most absurd things that the moms have come up with throughout the previous year. And so it's everything. I can't even remember what some of them are now, but everything from birth control to
Pulled pork recipes.
Pulled pork. Oh, you can't miss the pulled pork recipes. And so she compiles these into this song, and she shares it with the moms every year. But I also want to say that one of the things I want to do as the author of this book, as we are actually moving into the holidays, which was nowhere planned in the publishing process to have this come out right now, but it's kind of perfect, is that I really want to do some sing-alongs with Facebook groups. Like, everybody gets the book and we all get together on a Zoom and we do some sing-alongs.
Oh my God, that's perfect. That's the greatest idea. Yeah, you have to do that.
That'd be fun.
I say the book is worth it for that alone. Like, if you read it for nothing else,
yes, I hope everybody goes out and buys it for gifts. I think it'd be a great holiday gift.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. So a couple more questions about the book, and then we'll move to broader territory. But I wanted to ask you about the interloper too. So there is a character who Agatha feels very threatened by, and she sort of becomes intent on running this girl out of town. Her name is Lucy. So can you tell us ultimately what it is that Lucy symbolizes and why her presence is so weighty despite, or maybe because of, her anonymity?
Yeah, I mean, as a human and a writer, I'm always curious about people who are lost and people who are found in this world. And all three, my two previous novels kind of explore that in different ways. And Lucy came to me, I actually saw somebody who inspired her in our community, standing at one of the intersections, asking for money with a can. And I just, writer, human me, I just can't reconcile, like, in my head, like, why are some people's lives, why can some people be faced with something and pull out of it? And some people can't. And sometimes it's circumstance, sometimes it's economic, sometimes, those structures provide that place. But there's also something, I think, in people's souls that kind of either make them somebody who can be found versus somebody who stays lost. And I'm always just trying to explore that. And that's where Lucy and, the interloper came from. And she's just wildly important in the book because she triggers Agatha's fear more so than anything, and really becomes the target of that fear. But at the same time, she pushes Agatha to confront her fears because she's going into the woods. Right. If Agatha wants to deal with this, she has to follow her into the woods, one of her greatest fears. And so it's this funny thing of, like, you're either going to face it or you're going to hide, and Agatha just keeps going after it. So
sure. And I love that, there are all these things that you think, might be a passing reference or just a little moment, and they come back and they have, huge significance, and that plays out all throughout the book, which I think is wonderful. And I wanted to ask you too, so Agatha, in her professional life, she is a writer. She's a bit struggling at the moment, given her circumstances. Oh, and her agent is great, trying to track her down. Facebook, Twitter, text, phone calls. It's so funny. It's like Agatha has a stalker.
Her greatest fear, but it's her agent, so it's okay.
I know, and she has to come up with all these ways to stave her off. So what's the witty comeback or the gif or the meme that she can find? It's great. But because of that, there's such an obvious love of books and words and phrasing throughout the book. So that makes it a real joy to read for somebody like me who loves books and words and alliteration. So I'm just wondering, what did you hope to capture with that particular thread of the novel?
Oh, I just love to connect things, and that kind of comes slowly as I'm writing. Everything has to interconnect. It's like you got the surface of the ocean, and then you've got the interwebs underneath, and all the things that feed each other. And as I wrote draft after draft, that kind of started to become clear to me. And so I just started pulling, and then G-Dog and Zora Neale Hurston, and I love Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's one of my top 3 novels in my life, and I really wanted to find a way to kind of weave that in there.
It's great. I will admit I have not read it, and now I feel like I wrote it down and I was like, John, why haven't you read this?
You must go read it immediately.
I'm like, oh, the TBR pile grows again. I feel like every time I talk to somebody, it claims like another little piece of the house because the whole house is a TBR. So actually, I'm going to move to broader topics in a minute, but I want to ask you one final question. I think that I read somewhere on social media, did I read that you worked on this book for about 5 years? Is that the case? Can you talk about, how a project like this sustains you and how you're able to keep, I guess at some points it's passion, at other points it's just discipline that this has to be finished. Can you talk a little bit about that though? Because it's a long process, and I could imagine that there's a whole emotional sort of roller coaster that goes into that process and how that.
Yeah. Well, I actually was working on a different book when this idea came to me. We had just moved back to the US from China, and I was working on a book that takes place in Shanghai, and I was so committed to it. And then I was a new mom, and I got involved in some groups, and I was back in the US, and I was looking at social structures, and then all of a sudden Agatha started to pull at me, and off I went. I am like an insanely disciplined person. I don't know what that comes from, but right now I'm getting up every day between 3 and 3:30 in the morning to work because my kids are, remote schooling.
Right.
I'm teacher and everything else during the day.
And you look like a sane person.
Oh, looks can be deceiving, John. But once a story kind of grips me, I'm just driven. And the scary part of this was that I wrote this book in a completely different structure. It was kind of like a manual, a fictional manual of, I don't even know how I describe it, but it was a very different structure. And I thought it was all done and good and woohoo. I sent it to agent, and I was all ready for that. Yes, let's go. She's like, this isn't quite working. I was like, what are you talking about? So I took her thoughts and notes, and I believe she thought that I could go in and kind of start to tweak and, kind of reshape. And I am not that writer. I can't go in and be like, oh yeah, I'll just move something. I can't. So I walked away from it for a couple of months and did some other little things. And then it just in the middle of the night just starts to gnaw at me. I'm like, I think I've got it. And the opening scene really started to take shape. And from that moment on, then I'm just I'm addicted. I just, I'm writing when the kids are doing things. I'm in the car. I'm, trying not to do anything else with my brain. And then, that's where it happens.
Well, I'm just glad you didn't abandon it, because I think sometimes you need to put those things aside. But so second draft went to the agent and you mailed her a hatchet, I'm assuming, and then all is well.
I actually, do you know what I mailed her? I mailed her 2, I think, of the hammers that shatter car windows. That was my holiday gift to her a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's perfect. And there's also that level, like, you can't hide in your car because I can come in.
I'm coming.
Yeah, but I can cut in. All right, so I'm going to ask you, we're going to move away from the book a little bit, but you have taught all over the place. You've moved around a lot. You have a BA in both English and journalism. So first, having written a lot of nonfiction pieces in addition to your novels, can you talk about what you found to be the most transferable skills between journalism and fiction writing, but then conversely, what is the most challenging aspect or aspects of transitioning from one to another?
Yeah. Really, at the heart of it, they're both storytelling. And I think sometimes when people are writing nonfiction, like articles and, things for institutions, that kind of thing, they forget that they're telling a story, because you start to get all the facts and the figures and the things you have to include. But I think if you really get down to the fact that you're trying to tell somebody's story, and I always have to find that thing. It's like this nugget of gold for me. Like with Agatha, it was that opening chapter. Once I find that, I can write anything. But if I can't, I'm not great on really short deadlines because I take some time to, think about things and feel them and walk around with them. And so, but that's what I would say. It's really storytelling.
Sure. And so the question that I thought I was going to ask you last until I looked down to my piece of paper, I'm talking about how you teach all over the world and this and that. And I thought I was going to ask you about teaching, and then I asked you about journalism. But now I'm going to ask you about teaching. So I wanted to ask you, because as a teacher, obviously, you've worked with many different students of different ability levels, skill sets. And I always find it interesting to ask people who write and who teach, what is it, in your opinion, in your experiences of writing, that can be taught? What is sort of intrinsic to the person, and how can tenacity or discipline sort of factor into the equation?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think one of the most important things to teach is reading, and reading out loud, and really listening. And one of the places I taught was an arts college where, all the kids were fine arts majors, and many of them had been told throughout their lives, oh, you can't write, you're an artist, you're a visual person. And I never believed that. Like, I think everybody can write well if they just are freed of something. And I remember one kid, I think he was a senior, and he came into class, he was like, I can't write, I'm not going to write. And you also have to connect them to something that matters to them. And we did a structural parody of Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, which completely freed this kid once he had, a structure to work within. And I'll just never forget the day he walked into class, and this kid was beaming. He's like, I can write. I was like, you can write. And that led to all kinds of other things that he was writing. Even after he graduated, he would email me and be like, hey, I just wrote this thing. Can you read it? So for me, it's about connecting. It's about reading. And it's really about wanting to do it,
Sure. That must have been a great moment.
Oh, it was so fun. Oh my God. I was like, yes.
I know, you got to get those moments every once in a while.
You do. I love it. I love teaching.
And I can appreciate your point to reading, because I read a lot, which is why I don't write a lot. And I just keep telling myself it's you're putting in the work, it's research.
It is. It is.
I've been telling myself that, but validation, thank you.
I'm right there with you.
All right, now I'm going to open up Pandora's box.
Aha.
Because one of the great, debates I find in the publishing world and in fiction is, whether or not an MFA is necessary, how it might help a person, how it might hinder a person. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that, because you have an MFA, you write, you teach. So what are your thoughts on that? How have you found it helpful? Have you found that it's hindered you in any ways? And what advice would you give to people who are considering taking that path but haven't quite made up their mind and aren't sure if that's
Yeah.
what they need to do or should do.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I have mixed feelings about it, having, being a good number of years beyond my MFA. I absolutely loved our program. I was in Columbia College in Chicago, the fiction writing department, and loved, every teacher and every one of the students that I, took classes with. It gave me time. It gave me time to think and read deeply. Even this was in the 90s, and we had probably the most diverse program. I'm not using any stats here, but we had one of the most diverse programs in the country in terms of students, and in terms of what we read and what we explored, which was a real gift. And so the time was amazing. The deep thinking was amazing. I also think that because of working within a group and you're getting feedback all the time, that I strayed somewhat from my true voice and nature as a storyteller. But I also think that that's kind of necessary to be able to come back to yourself. So I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't.
Sure.
But I feel like once I left, I had to let go of some things. And then there's other things that I've, held on to quite tightly from the program. So it's a funny mixed bag. I think time and deep reading and being around people who, not everybody wants to hear you talk about books and storytelling and structure and page 3 every single moment. And when you're in an MFA program, everybody does. So that part is such a gift. So I think, it depends. And it also depends on, how strong a writer you are in terms of being able to stick to your own storytelling style.
Sure. Yeah, and I think the benefit of hindsight, helps with perspective there,
Yeah.
like you were saying, which is great because
Yeah.
I've literally seen people at parties like almost come to blows over, well, I have an MFA and I don't.
Oh, I know it erupts on all the social media. I'm like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, it's that fight again.
But it is funny because Agatha's quirky, and I love quirky, and I love like making those stories real because I think it's also very human. I think we see in Agatha almost every day. I don't think I don't think she's an unreal character, even though I highlight certain things about her. And that instinct, I mean, one of the first things I wrote when I was 7, when I started writing, was the story of this guy named Harold who had a flower growing out of his head. And like, that was my instinct back then. It's taken me many years to be able to craft a real story around some of these quirky characters that I, see in my head. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Patience is a virtue, people.
It is. And tenacity, you got to stick with it because, there are times when I would have walked away. And I think, that would have been a real tragedy for me.
Right. And for us, man, if I didn't have Agatha in my life, I mean, I wouldn't know it, but now that I know and can think about it, it's unfathomable. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, and this actually ties in a bit, with what we've been talking about, but people, are always looking for advice. Mm-hmm. And so I want to ask you, in terms of a writing life or a creative life, in sort of looking back, what is the best advice that you ever got? And then the best advice that you never got and had to learn for yourself and sort of wish maybe somebody could have cued you into a little bit sooner?
That is a very good question.
Had to have one.
I think, again, going back to Columbia College and my MFA, over and over we heard, listen to your voice. And I think for me, that was the best advice. And I think it takes a long time for some people. Maybe some people it takes a very short time, but for me it took a long time to really listen. And it's like not just listening, but being able to translate it onto the page. Those are two kind of separate but connected things. Really hearing it and then being able to get it on in a kind of successful way. So I would say that's probably the best advice I've ever gotten. the best advice I wish I had. Was that the other piece of it?
Yeah, something that, the best advice that you discovered for yourself and that you might tell people now that you wish somebody had told you back then.
Well, the one thing I say over and over as a writer and a teacher is writing begets writing. There are so many people and students I work with who, I'm going to sit and think about the story. I can't write yet. I'm just going to think. I'm like, no, you're not. You're going to get that pen on the paper, because as soon as you start writing, ideas start to come to you, and you're like, you leave whatever you started with and you are off down the road you're supposed to be on. And then, that takes but it really, like, you have to be writing to write what you really are trying to get to. So I say that a million times, writing begets writing.
Sure. And notice the guilty look that washes over.
Talking to you, John.
I know, I'm like, oh no, it's not another variation of actually sitting.
It's true. I'm like, come on, people, get the pen moving.
But it's true, if you don't do it, nothing happens. The page does not fill itself, unfortunately.
Nope. And nothing is changing while you're just sitting, noodling about it.
No. Or I find that now I have all these, what I think are wonderful ideas, and I'll tell myself, oh, that's so great. You're never going to forget that. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
By morning, inevitably.
Most days I don't remember my name. All right. So last two questions for you. Yep. So I wanted to ask you, obviously, we're living in really uncertain times between politics, the pandemic. You already mentioned that, you have children who are remote learning, which is a great change to whatever structure, you had. So how have you found that your relationship to writing and or reading has changed in the last 7 or 8 months? And what have you done, to try to adjust to that, other than, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning?
That's my adjustment.
That's a big one.
I've always been an early morning writer, but, prior to kids, early morning was 5 o'clock. And then one kid was, 4:15. And now really I get up. This morning I was up at 2:40, because I woke up and I was like, well, I could lie here until I go back to sleep, but then I'm just going to get up at 3:15. So I might as well get up. So that's been, I always say I'll sleep when I'm old. I'm like, well, you're kind of getting there. You probably need some sleep, but yeah, I can't not write. That's just how I am. I can't not sit in this quiet, dark by myself without any. And people say, well, when the kids are out in the afternoon, it's different. Like, I need the stillness and the energy to be just really calm. Reading has been really challenging. I have not read like I usually read, like I used to read. I need to get back to it. I have a huge stack of books that are waiting for me, and it's just piling up. I'm like, oh no. But I also, I've never been a person who listens to books, to audiobooks, but I'm actually really thinking that I might start doing that, because while kids are doing things, I can always have, one little thing in here. And that's how I've gone to like events. Like, I haven't gone to as many literary events in years as I've gone to in the past 7 months, which I am so excited about. Like, I love all this virtual stuff. I'm like, this is perfect. Because, I live in like a suburb. Like, when we were in China, we used to go to things all the time. But then, we're here and things are happening in Boston, but I'm not close enough to Boston to do it quickly. And now we can't go. So I love virtual.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's opened a whole new world. Like, I never would have thought I'd be doing a virtual show. I'd never feel like technology is my friend, but it's been the best way to stay connected.
Yeah.
And listening to audiobooks, I've done that a little bit more too. And you're right, because it's not the effort of holding the book and paying attention to the words that are written. You get to hear a voice and somebody telling the story. But I also have to say, one more quick plug for the book before I ask you my last question. But I mean, I really was saying that I found myself feeling like this was the book that I needed in my life right now. And I feel like a lot of other people are going to feel that way too, because, we all have problems and we're all watching other people deal with problems that are probably more significant than our own. And then there's somebody like Agatha, who has her own very unique set of problems, but she's just such a unique character and so quirky and hilarious and wonderful that it really is like the best kind of escapism. And so I keep, tipping my virtual hat to people like you who are providing us this great entertainment in a time where I think we probably need it more than ever.
You just made me very happy. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Well, it's so true, and I feel really fortunate. I feel like my writing has gotten a little bit slower, with the pandemic. Like it's harder to put in the effort, so I'm taking on sort of less reviewing deadlines. But I've been reading like crazy, and I've been seeing hours on the clock that I haven't seen in like 20 years. Like it'll be 2 o'clock, and I'll be like, okay, you have to go to bed now, so you can get up in a couple hours. But I think that's the greatest gift. So I thank you very much for that, and I hope people pick up the book, because then they're gifting your gift, which is even better. It's like a double win.
I love it.
So last question for you. Obviously we've talked a couple times about how early you're getting up in the morning because you were compelled to be at the keyboard, and I'm assuming not always just to be talking at people like me. So are you able to give us a little teaser of what you're working on now, or is it too soon to say?
I've actually, it's funny because as we were moving toward, publication here, I was doing all the edits and all the stuff that leads up to this. So I didn't really have any time to be working on anything new. But 2 weeks ago, I was up and I was like, I have to write something. So I actually opened that novel that I put down in order to write this one. And I did a little work on it. And I can tell you this much. And it's evolved in my head, but I've been writing this book in my head and on the paper since 2006. So it's kind of crazy, but it is, anything can happen in China. This is the amazing thing. And in Shanghai is the most amazing one. It's like my heart home. And this is kind of a time travel love quest.
Ooh.
Set in Shanghai.
That's fabulous. And it seems like full circle. I mean, if you spent 5 years with Agatha, why not spend 14 years with...
That's right.
I don't know. Math isn't my strong suit, but...
It's a long time.
Well, that's excellent. And I'm all for it. If it gets you up and excited, I mean, if you're excited about something and excited to work, that tells you something. But anyway, I am going to sign off with you now because I know that you have another event coming soon and you were up very early today. So this is probably lunchtime. So you have like 15 minutes to eat your lunch. I'll tell people it's 9:45 in the morning when we're doing this.
That's right. Isn't it bedtime? Shouldn't I be going to bed?
I know. I was going to say take away like 7 hours. The day's pretty much.
That's right.
But Kristin Bair, thank you so much for doing this. And the book is Agatha Arch is Afraid of Everything. It is available right now, and it is the best book that you will gift this holiday season. So do it. And thank you so much, Kristin. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I love it.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.